Hey there, folks. Zane from the Infinite Jukebox, aka the #1 fan of throwing myself into a trash compactor, here with another EP review. And today I want to talk about the new Trippie Redd and MGK record, Genre, space, Sadboy. Look, I'm just gonna get this out of the way. Despite being an EP, I would not blame anybody for considering this the worst album of 2024 so far, and I don't care if this technically is an EP. It's almost 30 minutes, so this is still gonna end up on my worst albums list at the end of the year. It's inevitable. It would be wrong of me not to. In a way, ragging on genre Sadboy is one of the most painfully obvious things that any self-righteous music nerd like myself could possibly do, because to the surprise of absolutely nobody, Trippie Redd and MGK, who officially changed his stage name from Machine Gun Kelly to just MGK earlier this year, are not the kinds of artists that are also found being positively received by the same circles that tend to circle jerk over Death Grip's Radiohead and My Bloody Valentine. It's a shocker, I know, but as a whole, they tend to not have huge fan bases in those corners of the internet. But it's kind of also for that reason that I tend to have difficulty having a huge amount of malice towards either of them. I mean, don't get me wrong, they both put out some awful music at a pretty constant rate, and I do, unfortunately, feel the need to listen to most of their material when they do drop it, or else that completionist part of my brain tells me I didn't listen to all of the major new releases throughout the year. But as a whole, I would say that Trippie Redd is, above all else, perpetually boring, and MGK is consistently unintentionally hilarious, if anything, or at the very least his pop-punk era is, or was, because I guess that's over now. This man can't decide what he's doing. Mainstream Sellout in 2022 especially is a record from MGK that has a painful lack of self-awareness that translates to it being a genuinely funny record, albeit unintentionally, and I still, to this day, refuse to consider it one of the worst albums of that year, because although it is a bad album in the sense of it being unintentionally amusing, I still do derive at least a degree of joy from it in the same way that I enjoy a Corey Feldman record. It just feels wrong for me to say that one of the worst albums of a given year is a record that I found funny and that I've enjoyed ironically with friends, etc., etc. And that leads me to here, Genre Sadboy, where it manages to be all of those things except the unintentionally fun part. I actually think it's kind of amazing that Genre Sadboy as an EP manages to eclipse any of the full-length LPs put out by Trippie or MGK in recent years to be pretty much the most atrocious thing that either have done to date, and that's kind of saying something because they both have their respective monstrosities in their own rights. To decide who's the less awful half of the sort of dynamic duo you have going here is kind of like picking which kneecap hurts less when you get it both smashed in with a baseball bat. It's not a pleasant experience either way, and I guess maybe Trippie Redd is the lesser of two evils here. He's definitely the least annoying of the two anyway. Much of the record just kind of sees Trippie doing some of his best worst impressions of the sort of emo rap world, and I kind of think that just results in more of a Lil Peep if he was bad aesthetic that's going on in full force here, which isn't necessarily super rare, but is, still relevant for the record. I really do feel like Trippie's trying to go in more of an emotive direction here in terms of his performance, yet ironically, he delivers these emotions with absolutely no emotion. I mean, it's so funny when you have these instrumentals that are obviously very much meant to convey emotional songwriting and performances and melodies, melancholy and sadness and depression, and then when you actually listen to Trippie flow over them or sing over them or whatever, it just sounds like he's bored out of his skull, and it gets to the point where I genuinely don't think, after multiple listens of this EP, that there's a single moment where Trippie tries to do anything even remotely vulnerable that actually works here. I would say that's especially true on some of the more stripped back cuts, like Who Do I Call, for example, which kind of are structured around this reliance on a need for humanity a need for emotional honesty, and that is something that Trippie can just not deliver even an ounce of throughout the entirety of this record. I mean, I'm not expecting the guy to put out some sort of emotional magnum opus roller coaster of feeling or anything like that, but it really is baffling how he sounds so extremely disinterested in the material at hand here, while also doing everything he can to ensure that you know he's disinterested, or at the very least unintentionally manages to reveal that he comes across as disinterested, even though the material itself is based around the exact opposite. And because of that, it feels kind of baffling when he drops the occasional bar about like being a badass or a spawn of the devil, or even more so when he does a little segment about his struggles with addiction or with romance on tracks like the song Struggles, for example, because the guy treats genre Sadboy with the same emotion that you get out of pastel goth mood boards on Tumblr. And honestly, I think I've seen more stuff on less pleasant sides of Tumblr that have moved me than what's found on this record. While Trippie's performances throughout genre Sadboy could be charitably described as meandering and at worst described as outright terrible, I don't necessarily think that he's completely hateable. It just feels like he doesn't want to be there. MGK, on the other hand, he's just downright unpleasant, to the surprise of no one, really. While you could totally make the argument that the sort of snot-nosed douchebag character that MGK has been working with ever since his rap days has been pretty constant overall across his projects, including here, I would also say that I feel like each passing record seems to reveal that to be less and less of a character and even more of an accurate reflection of MGK himself. And I think that especially if statements surrounding this record just being two buds cooking up some tunes in the studio happens to be actually true and accurate, then man, MGK just sounds like he sucks as a person, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, the way that he slurs his words intentionally throughout the entirety of this EP is ridiculously corny. It feels like he's constantly trying to remind the listener that he's a depressed stoner who doesn't give a fuck about shit. And this faux vulnerability is just ridiculously grating, despite the fact that this EP isn't even 30 minutes long. It feels like he's doing it almost the entire time, and it gets pretty old pretty fast. It's a mixture of fakeness and this sort of obnoxious self-pity that you get from him throughout a lot of this record on tracks like Hiding in the Hills. That's actually worse than I would say anyone has ever seen from him on a studio album before, especially when he drops lyrics like, I don't have no friends in this motherfucking room. When does all this end? I've been staying up till dawn, riding by myself, but the devil came along. And it's just like, oh, brother, this guy stinks. I don't really know how to fit this in naturally, but the following track, No More, also features arguably the worst lyrics on the record. As MGK states, I hate that I grew up sad as a kid, then I grew up and got sadder again. Come on, man. Guys, MGK is so sad. That's why he says it a million times throughout this record and never finds a single creative way to convey that sadness. It's almost like it's manufactured angst to appeal towards the kind of crowd that listens to MGK, while Trippie Redd also tries to transition his own fan base and popularity over to that audience as well. Man, it's like none of this is even remotely real, and it's completely cheesy and corny, and it feels like a bad B flick. And look, I'm not trying to totally dismiss any of the negative emotions that MGK or Trippie Redd are actually trying to convey here. I don't know their personal lives, I'm not paparazzi, I'm not planting cameras in their houses to see if they really are depressed or not. I'm not checking their medications or anything like that. I'm not doing that. I don't know their personal lives. However, I do know that this record does not, at any given moment, feel like a record that's honestly being made to genuinely convey those emotions. It never feels like MGK or Trippie Redd are making this record because they're trying to express themselves and how they feel, or because they're trying to make a record that maybe a lot of people could relate to. It feels like a self-indulgent record that's exploitative of one's own feelings because, hey, I am or was sad. So if I just made an album where I said I was sad a lot, then other people who are also sad would go and listen to it because they can relate to that. And at the end of the day, that's what frustrates me. There's so many references to, oh, I'm depressed, or like, oh, I have no friends, or like, oh, like I'm an addict, or like, oh, I'm on meds, or I should be on meds, blah blah blah. And I really do feel like it's almost disrespectful in a way towards people who actually do struggle with those kind of things. Not because they don't. I'm not saying that MGK or Trippie Redd don't. They totally may. Again, I don't know their personal lives. But the manner in which it is being presented here, the way it's being put into the light, almost romanticized in a way of like, yeah, I'm like sad and depressed all the time, but I'm also gonna like slur my words around and like do my fake cool emo rap voice because it's gonna make me sound like a badass, and I'm gonna have Trippie Redd here so he can like also do his own corny bullshit. It feels very wrong, this entire EP. I can't really express why or how. It just does not feel like an EP. It doesn't feel like a record that should be able to exist, not because it's like offensively bad or anything like that, but because it just feels fake above all else. MGK's delivery on other tracks here, like Lost Boys, is just outright terrible, with the aforementioned track in particular having this really weird concept of delivery, the way that he has this choppy enunciation on lines like bloodshot, blue eyes, to the point where it almost nearly sounds like each was a different take, and they just kind of spliced them together. Like, every single vocal take they did, he could only get out like a couple syllables before they were like, alright, we're good. Machine Gun Kelly, MGK, you gotta move on to the next one. Say the next word. Say the next line. And then they just kind of chop them together in post. And the result is a sound that comes across as very jagged, very rigid, and unintentionally so. It kind of ends up sounding like a mess. Just when you thought that maybe rap was safe from MGK and that emo-influenced pop punk would have to, carry that weight for a while there. Nope. The guy manages to root himself in both here, and both genres are worse off for it. I mean, it goes without saying that Genre Sadboy is just the kind of record that wasn't going to be great based on the two individuals behind it in the first place. I don't think anybody of sound mind was going into the new MGK and Trippie Redd album and being like, man, this is gonna kill it. But at the same time, the issues with this record do extend beyond them as well. The performers here are the main key aspect of this record's failure, but also the instrumentals here are not great either. In fact, they're pretty terrible. A number of the beats here feel extremely thin, and they lack a lot of development that you would kind of hope for from a record that's trying to be very emotionally provoking. And some songs even feel kind of messy in the way that they're structured. I think the track Beauty has this sort of auditory spacing, if you will, between the actual percussion and the guitar, synth, whatever that may be, in the mix that manages to feel extremely awkward and very muddy, while at the same time the vocals throughout that track also manage to not really have a distinct place in the way that that track and its beat is produced. It just kind of ends up coming across as a dull, colorless mess. The more emo rap kind of tracks like Who Do I Call, Lost Boys, as well as the mostly acoustic album closer Summer's Gone, are so trope-laden, mid-tier in terms of emo rap and emo rap instrumentals that it kind of leads one to wonder if they even made them themselves or if they just got them off of some stock beat website and maybe spruced them up a little bit, but not a lot, obviously, because they really do feel like the most synthetic, uninteresting, uninspired, and in terms of the genre at large, repetitious instrumentals that you could ever possibly get from the more quote-unquote intimate side of the emo side of rap as a whole. Also, for the sake of not being accusatory, that part about them not making the instrumentals and it sounding like they just got them from a stock beat-making website or whatever, that's a joke. It sounds like it. It sounds like it. I'm not saying they did it. I'm just saying it sounds like it. Okay, don't sue me, please. More than anything, though, I mean, even maybe my biggest issue with Genre Sadboy as an EP is that it feels like the personification of nothingness. And that might not necessarily sound like a bad thing. I kind of prefer a lot of nothingness over Trippie Redd and MGK most days. But really, I can at least say a couple good things about each of their individual respective solo careers and work in the past, even if I do think most of it is awful, that I can't say about this EP. I mean, this EP isn't ambitious like some of Trippie Redd's solo albums, and it isn't energetic or unintentionally funny like some of MGK's more recent pop punk era albums. All I can say about this record is that it feels like the culmination of nothing. It feels like the culmination of no talents. It feels like the culmination of no real creative direction. And while I do think that there are some serious atrocities in their respective solo careers and that they have way more misses, if not almost exclusively misses, compared to hits, I do at least think that they've, over time, both found unique creative artistic avenues to represent themselves with. I'm not necessarily saying that I'm happy when a Trippie Redd song or a Machine Gun Kelly song pops up on some random Spotify playlist that I'm chilling to, but at the same time, I will at least recognize that it's by them, and then I can, skip to the next song as quick as possible, but I'll at least recognize it's by them. They have their distinct sounds, so it's almost kind of impressive that here on Genre Sadboy, they sacrifice that for some of the most milquetoast music that I've heard all year, accompanied by some of the worst lyrics and most just unimpassioned performances that you could ever hope for. I mean, really, Genre Sadboy just kind of feels like both of them giving up on any hope of being creative or sticking out from an artistic standpoint for the sake of putting out an EP that ironically manages to feel like more of a slog at a runtime of under 30 minutes, more so than some of Trippie and MGK's solo albums that are double or in some cases even triple that length. If I had to compare Genre Sadboy to an actual experience in life that you can have, I would say it's kind of like taking a quick drive to the store, but also hitting every single pothole along the way. Like, yeah, the journey's gonna be brief, but that still doesn't prepare you for the absolute misery that you happen to be in for, especially if you're like me and you have to drive to and back from the store multiple times because then you can't talk about the album on your channel. I'll admit the analogy fell apart a little bit there, but you get what I mean. It's a record that is extremely brief because it is an EP. It is brief in nature, yet at the same time, it feels like a less pleasant experience than some genuinely bad full-length albums I've heard so far this year. Trippie's performances are just one eye-glazing verse after another, and honestly, I kind of feel like any hope I had of him really putting out a record that just stuck at this point is just sort of slipping away. I'm not saying I have no faith in the guy. I still think he has potential, but at this point in his career, if he hasn't put out anything that's really landed, for me personally at least, I just don't see it happening in the future. On the other hand, MGK's presence is a friendly little reminder that maybe, just maybe, bullying is okay sometimes. This EP is a muddy, thrown together, self-obsessed mess of a listening experience that seemingly can't get anything right in any given department. The lyrics are absolutely awful. The instrumentals are indistinct and underdeveloped. The energy here is lackluster. In fact, there's pretty much no energy here at all. There isn't a huge amount of chemistry, even, between Trippie Redd and Machine Gun Kelly, despite the fact that this EP is supposed to be, just two buds busting out their chops in the studio and making some tunes. It feels like there's nothing going on between the two of them, exclusively almost, because they sound both very disinterested in making this EP in the first place. Whether that was intentional and them trying to get emotional with it, or if they just genuinely didn't want to be there, that's up in the air, obviously, but nonetheless, it results in an EP that, ironically, despite being in the realm of emo rap, has no emotion to it. Also, what the fuck is Jid doing here? Like I wanted to fit that in the review somewhere. He's just kind of here. I don't. What's up with that? He's just there, and I don't like that. I mean, the way that I picture it, it was just like Jid kind of standing there in the background, kind of like Hannibal Buress when he was still on the Eric Andre show. And then when Who Do I Call comes around, he just steps behind the mic to deliver 20 seconds of a mildly okay verse, and then just leaves and gets his paycheck. And I mean, between this and that verse he did on Enemy by Imagine Dragons, I kind of respect the guy. I mean, the man's putting his name to some less than high quality music and he's getting paid for it. So, I mean, go for it, I guess. I just, I don't think I'd want my name associated with either Trippie Red or MGK, especially not MGK. Man, that's rough. I'm going to give this record a 1 star out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.